Welcome back to Storytime with Mr. Jackson. In this reaction video, we're diving deep into the demonic secrets and hidden truths behind St. Patrick's Day and Valentine's Day. From ancient Druids and Roman rituals to the twisted origin of Cupid, you're about to find out what really lies beneath the celebrations we take for granted. Let me break it down before we react, so you don't miss a beat.
The demonic secret about St. Patrick's Day.
This is going to ruin it for a lot of people that love St. Patrick's Day. First of all, it has nothing to do with Irish pride. That's how it was shown later. There's nothing to do with leprechauns or Irish pride. It has nothing to do with that.
You just killed two great fantasies.
I know.
Right,
really, if you look into what that was, is that St. Patrick, right? The St. Patrick was a Roman. His father was a Roman official, and he was tasked, just like the Roman Empire did with destroying the Gnostic people who originally were the Egyptians and burning the Library of Alexandria. He was tasked with going to Ireland and the UK and Scotland area, but we specifically think of it as Ireland because that was the core of this,
Right.
where they went there and they were supposed to eradicate the last group on the planet that was still studying was that ancient old religion who were known as the serpents. So if you look at the story of St. Patrick, he was ridding the serpents, the snakes, right? The snakes from Ireland. But if you look all throughout geologic history of that region, there's never been snakes that lived there. It's a metaphor.
Huh.
It's a metaphor for the Druid people and pagans as a more general term, anyone who didn't follow this monotheistic Christian religion. And they were seen as a threat because they were the last group that had the ancient knowledge, and they were greatly demonized later. So what happened was, you're celebrating the representation of the genocide and cleansing of the last serpent group on the planet, the Druids who built Stonehenge.
Peace, family. I'm gonna drop this video and then you lot are gonna resurface it on Valentine's Day. Do you know the word Cupid was a sinful word to our ancestors? Literally, the word Cupid comes from the word cupidity. Yes? It was actually a diss in regards to our spiritual way of life and seen as one of the greatest sins of the heart. To be Cupid or to act in cupidity was to have greed and yearn for the possessions of someone else. Yes, it's the origins of the word covet, which means to yearn for someone else's possessions, to be greedy, right? Now, fast forward from ancient times to modern times, where we all take on the mindset of Western civilization, and the word Cupid is the symbol of love. So essentially, what we've been following as the symbol of love is the ideology of lusting and greeding and yearning to possess someone else's belongings. This is why our idea and perception of love has been so marred and misconstrued, and why most of us in loving so-called relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, are having a big problem. Because love, as far as we've understood it in the 20th century, has been to yearn, to be greedy, and want to possess someone or something. This, in terms of the spiritual way of life of our ancestors, known as Ma'at, is literally the greatest sin of the heart. Now let's compare that with the definition of love as it pertains to our spiritual law. In our ancient times, when we had an attraction to someone and someone activated our energy, we would call that ma'a. Yes? And we would honor the ma'a we have between someone by giving to that person in a way that was to amplify and beautify them and their lives and their livelihood. Yes, the definition of ma'a is to give, seeking nothing in return, and to express emotionally oneness with all people and things. Literally the opposite of the word Cupid. Go and look up the word cupidity for yourself. Yes, family, we've been dissing ourselves and literally setting ourselves up for failure in the area of love for centuries. Today we put that down. Love and our attraction to love is called ma. Yes, like mama, ma. Giving, seeking nothing in return. The emotional expression of oneness. Peace in, love out to all my Martians.
Snake So Street Patrick really drove out the serpents. Mind blown. After hearing about Cupid's origin, Valentine's Day hits way different now. That info about the Druids and ancient knowledge was wild.
The truth about St. Valentine's Day. And it might make you a little... yeah. So St. Valentine's, a 26 billion with a B industry that exists around a day of love. But why do we celebrate St. Valentine's Day? Especially when we find out Valentine's Day originally commemorated a Christian martyr losing his head in the 3rd century. Who is Valentine? We don't exactly know who or which Valentinus was the actual Saint Valentine, and there's some options, which is one reason so many dang churches in Europe from Rome to Ireland profess to have pieces of his skull or his whole skull in their reliquaries, which makes one ask who in the heck do all of these skulls belong to? But the chronography of 354, the earliest list of Roman Christian martyrs, doesn't mention Saint Valentine, although that list was compiled by a Christian named Valentinus, a popular name at the time. But later lists compiled between 460 and 544 do include this Saint Valentine, who in some versions of the tale was a 3rd century priest or bishop who ministered to persecuted Christians of the Roman Empire and was unalived for his efforts. Other legends say that he was a martyr in Africa, but the most popular stories by far have him located square in Rome. Regardless, the Feast of St. Valentine was established by Pope Gelasius on February 14, 496 AD, and by the 8th century, the occasion evolved to St. Valentine's Day. So there was a dude somewhere, we just don't know exactly which one it was, and a whole load of legends developed over later centuries about the guy and his exploits. And the story became really popular in the Middle Ages. Some stories say Valentinus used to illegally marry soldiers and their wives when Emperor Claudius supposedly forbade marriages of Roman soldiers in the mid-3rd century, as Claudius believed unmarried soldiers fought better. And it was after being caught doing these marriages, Valentine was clubbed, stoned, and chopped. This supposedly is where we get the idea of parchment hearts being given to one another, as Valentine supposedly did this for soldiers to carry with them to war, to remind these men of their vows to their wives and of God's love. And later versions of the story said he gave it to persecuted Christians who he would pray for. But verifiable history is a bit hazy on the subject. Another popular medieval legend of St. Valentine comes from the Acta, where a Roman priest named Valentinus was taken into custody by a magistrate named Asterius during the reign of Emperor Claudius II. And while talking about Jesus, Asterius promised to convert if Valentinus could cure his foster daughter of blindness. And Valentinus said, "Lord Jesus Christ, enlighten your handmaid, because you are God, the true light." And boom, girl could see. Convinced, Asterius and his family were baptized. Unlucky for them, they were all later unalived by Emperor Claudius for not acknowledging that the emperor was a god, with Valentinus being with his body buried at the site of his unalivement on the Via Flaminia, where a chapel was later built. It's a great story, but again, there are very few actual verifiable facts about it. Similar legends sprouted up in the Middle Ages that Valentine was the Bishop of Terni during the 3rd century and was under house arrest for evangelizing, or in some versions, offering marriages to soldiers. Like other versions of the tale, while under house arrest, he was discussing the truth of Jesus with the judge, and to test him, the judge brought in his blind adopted daughter. Valentine prayed, and the girl was healed. So the judge was like, "Dang, bro, okay, what do I need to do?" So Valentine said he should break all his pagan idols, fast for 3 days, and then be baptized. So the judge and his 44-member household did as Valentine asked, and the judge additionally freed all the Christian inmates in his province. But in this version, Valentine was later arrested for evangelizing and was brought before Emperor Claudius. And Claudius really liked Valentine until Valentine tried to convince Claudius about Jesus being God and refusing to worship the emperor. In Rome, it was believed that the emperor was a god, but Valentine said he couldn't worship him, so Valentine was unalived under the capital charge of atheism. And the day before he was appointed to lose his head, Valentine sent a letter to the daughter of the judge, whose blindness he had healed, and in some versions of the legend had fallen in love with. And he signed the letter, "From your Valentine." And it's this version of the story that became popular with some big-time writers of the past. Chaucer, Shakespeare, guys like that. And those guys are linked to really pushing the romantic narrative of the tales of St. Valentine, helping turn it into the holiday we know today with our elements of Eros and Cupid and stuff like that. Now, I have to put this in here because if I don't, someone's going to pop off in the comments with the whole, well, Valentine's Day is really a pagan celebration of Lupercalia. But very few scholars hold fast to that idea nowadays. And Lupercalia was a rural fertility celebration held on what's now February 15th, honoring the Roman god Lupercus. It originally involved sacrificing goats and dogs, but evolved into this crazy celebration in cities where during festivities, horned up half-naked fellas wearing animal skins would look for women to hit with their goat whips, as it was supposed to promote fertility. And if women were already pregnant, it was thought being struck by these whips would make their babies healthy. Man, Romans. In 496 AD, however, Pope Gelasius supposedly denounced the rowdy festival and outlawed it. But he was the guy who established the first feast of St. Valentine to be celebrated on the day of Valentine's execution, February 14th. Still, there's no direct evidence that the Pope purposefully replaced Lupercalia with the more chilled out holy day of the martyred St. Valentine. But as I always say, no religion exists in a vacuum, so who knows? I'm sure it had something a little to do with it. But it's important to remember the original feasts of St. Valentine were not about romanticized Eros and Cupid style love, but the miraculous, sacrificial, faith-driven love of Christian brotherhood. It would be the later medieval poets who really brought the romantic portion to the forefront, literally romanticizing what would become a day for romantics, which is kind of neat. So, is Valentine's history verifiable? Not really. But the story that reaches us today is filled with the power of sacrificial love. And even 1,500 years later, is an inspiration to many. So God bless. Happy Valentine's Day.
Anyone else shocked? Do y'all think these holidays were created to erase older spiritual systems? Cupidity, being the root word for Cupid, makes so much sense now. Who else loves these long-form breakdowns? Mr. Jackson always brings the truth. Should we really be celebrating these holidays after knowing the full history? I didn't know Valentine's Day was based on a martyr's execution. Which part of the video stood out to you the most? Let's talk about it. I had to rewind the Druid part. That connection to serpents is deep. Like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications. Drop a comment below. Do you still see these holidays the same? Was this your first time hearing any of this? Let's have a conversation in the comments, and don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear the truth.